Hi, I'm Alex Trenoweth, and I'm going to be talking about the growing pains of Harry Potter. I'll be looking at some relevant astrology charts about the movies and the franchise and the characters as well. I'll also have a few really short film clips to show you from the various uh, different parts of the series. So I'm a Harry Potter fan, but I don't know everything about Harry Potter. So if anybody wants to leave a comment or make some suggestions, that's absolutely fine. I'm happy to hear them. Okay, so these three became the most famous adolescents in the world at one point. When the movie came out, everyone was really excited about this new venture into magic, which was the first time that school children really got a good dose of a favorable way of looking at the magical world. And as an astrologer, I was very excited to see this kickoff because it seemed to me that J.K. Rowling had at least some nice to say about astrologers. But as we'll see as we go along in the series, things kind of took a little bit of a meandering, and I started wondering what J.K. Rowling was trying to say about astrology and astrologers. So this, of course, is Hogwarts. This is where it all happened. This is the magical school that the children went to. And if you know the story, the children grew up in this magical world, but some children, like Harry Potter, grew up in the Muggle world, where magic doesn't exist. And he had to live quite a very deprived life until he was finally rescued and taken away to Hogwarts. But I remember watching this in the cinema for the first time and feeling like my breath was taken away by this introduction to this wonderful world where magic happens all the time, and normal people, muggles, missed out on it. Magic happened all around them, and they never saw it. And it kind of struck me that's kind of how it is with astrology. Astrologers are always talking about, cycles and how astrology works, and we kind of feel that non-astrologers miss out on all the fun. So this is a typical Hogwarts classroom. There a lot of children are taught by a single teacher, and it isn't a sort of magical little creatures are flying around. We don't get that too much in classrooms today, although if you had seen the class I taught today, you might beg to differ. But anyway, it isn't too much different from this very old, outmoded model of education that's been around since the Industrial Revolution. It's still the same concept today. It's 30 children being taught by one single adult, all at the same pace, all required to progress at the same rate with the same outcomes. The desired outcome of this type of education was to create workers who would be happy to be in a factory doing the same thing day after day for a little pay. So good behavior in schools is defined as sitting down, being quiet, and doing your work. And it was meant to be as cost efficient as it possibly could. There's a lot of problems with this way of educating children. We are certainly coming into a time when we are moving away from educating our children this way. And I've been saying it for a number of years now. Once we get that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius later this year, I think we're going to see some really big changes in the way we educate our children. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more children being educated at home via the internet, where a more bespoke education can be offered. But anyway, I just wanted to point out that this is kind of the same model that the Hogwarts used as well, one single teacher with 30 children. This is from Robert Curry's website. He was kind of the one that pointed me in the direction of how the houses were according to elements. So Robert said that the Gryffindors represented the element of fire, the Ravenclaws were the element of air, and the Hufflepuffs were the element of earth, and Slytherins were the element of water. So I thought that was really interesting to see it broken down that way. So I have a particular way of working with astrology, and I just wanted to show a little bit about how I work as an astrologer. I have my own theory about the adolescence, the astrology of adolescence. And so this is based on astrological theory, what we would expect from certain cycles of planets. I've looked at external resources from what other people are saying, psychologists are saying, and finally I tie it into some research I've done with statistics. So I have this triangulation of facts going on that I'm working with. So I'm using astrology as kind of being propped up against another field of study and backing up with statistics as well. So one of the people I looked at for how he worked with children and how he developed his cycles of development was Jean Piaget, who is one of the first child psychologists. So he was born in the late 19th century. He had a background in natural history and philosophy, and he began developing his theory through watching members of his family, his nieces and nephews. And he came up with this idea that children learn like in blocks, and they couldn't move on from one block to the next block until they had mastered the baseline of what was required. What Einstein said was that his theory was so simple that only a genius could come up with it. And so reading through Jean Piaget's work, I kind of realized, well, we have this with Jupiter and Saturn cycles. So just let me go through really quickly about Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development. So he said that children have are in a sensory motor period from birth to 2 years old. And in this period, they develop object permanence. And just to remind you what that is from your psychology days back in high school, object permanence is when a child, when they're really young, babies are really young, if you have an object and you put it behind your back, the child will think that that object has disappeared and he won't look for it. However, he will get to the stage at around 2 years old when you show him the object and you hide it behind your back, and he'll go looking for it because he knows it hasn't disappeared. It still exists somewhere. He just has to find it. So moving on to the next stage is something called pre-operational, and it happens between the ages of about 2 to about 7. And this is when a child is starting to develop a sense of logic. And when you talk to children at this age, they have some really unusual ideas about how the world works. They're asking a lot of questions, they're very curious about the world, but they're starting to understand a little bit more like abstract reasoning. Now they get to the concrete operational stage between the ages of 7 to 11. So they have these really rigid set of beliefs, probably instilled from the family, maybe a little bit from the school that they are educated in. So they still hold on to these beliefs, but they're less egocentric. They're starting to learn to take in other people's beliefs. And then finally, the formal operational stage, which is from about 11 years old to adulthood, when children are really starting to develop abstract ideas and deductive reasoning. It's interesting when you're working with this stage to ask children about perception in art, for example. They start to understand how lines of perception work, and they are able to draw more realistically. So he had this idea that about the accommodation and assimilation. And what he thought was that you still had your core set of beliefs, but as you grow older, you're able to accept and to understand other people's way of thinking and their belief systems. He also worked with qualitative, not quantitative analysis. So he was looking at the quality of what was going on and not so much the statistical research. Erik Erikson had a profound effect on me because his ideas actually led to me writing a book on astrology and child development. So he said that his life stages suggest that two extremes are held in tension until the individual accepts both as being useful and required. And as a result of this, a resolution is, a virtue is developed. And I can think of no better way to describe an opposition, an aspect of opposition, or to a lesser extent, a square. These two things are being pushed together and a decision has to be made. So they're highly productive. And this is why in my work, I only look at the hard stages, the hard aspects and the conjunctions as well, because there's something that has to come out of them. So this is just a few examples of, well, this is his model. So just to talk you through the first stage, trust versus mistrust. A baby in its mother's arms has to believe that mom isn't going to drop him. And if mom does have an accident or whatever, and jolts the baby has to believe that he's going to be safe still. So it's trust versus mistrust, and the virtue that's developed out of this is hope that, you know, that the child will be safe, the hope that the mother loves him and will look after him. So looking at it astrologically, these are the stages of development that I started working with. So at the age of 2, there's a Jupiter sextile Jupiter. I'm talking about Jupiter transiting Jupiter sextile its natal position at around the age of 2. And then around the age of 3, it's the first waxing Jupiter square. That's a transiting Jupiter square its natal position. At the age of 6, it's the transiting Jupiter opposition to its natal position. Then at 7, it's the first waxing Saturn square. At 9, the first waning Jupiter square. So the transiting planet is coming up to conjunction again, the return. At the age of 12 is the first Jupiter return. At the age of 14 is again the Jupiter sextile its natal position, but also added into this is Uranus at the same time. It's the first Ptolemaic transiting aspect to its natal position by sextile, and that is Uranus sextile Uranus. And this is when you know, children start to develop a sense of rebellion. They start to listen more to their peers than to parents and teachers, and they start to separate away from the parents and teachers. They start to develop their own selves. They're less concerned with what their parents think, and they're starting to become their own person at this stage. And a lot of parents find this stage really difficult, and of course children of this age find it also difficult to grow away from parents, because they love their parents and they want to be with them, but they also understand that they have to grow up and have to develop their own lives. And then at the age of 15 is a Saturn opposition. So what I found using qualitative research through interviewing teachers and talking to parents is that teachers were less likely to enjoy teaching 13 to 14-year-olds. Year 9s in over here in England, or 8th grade in the States, is the stage that teachers found most challenging and most difficult. And what we tend to do is we tend to isolate this age group and put them in a school all by themselves. So everybody kind of has to go through puberty all together. We take them away from their nice familiar environment in elementary or primary school, and we put them into this sort of seething cauldron of hormones, and everyone has to be forced to go through puberty and take exams all at the same time. But something really interesting I want to point out too is the Jupiter sextile Jupiter stage up here at the age of 2. This is when a child is growing out of babyhood and into toddlerhood. And so they're starting to become a child, not a baby anymore, but actually a child. And here at the Jupiter sextile stage down here is when a child is growing out of being a kid and into being an adult. So these are the key stages of Jupiter in terms of cycles. And the reason why I want to go through these is because I wanted to test if Harry Potter was just an ordinary teenager. And if he was, then he should go through these cycles the same as any other teenager. I also wanted to test whether or not J.K. Rowling was an astrologer, if she was using astrology. And I've come to, the conclusion I've come to is yes, she is. So I want to show you how she's using astrology. So down here, I talked about the first Jupiter square at around the age of 3 years old. So between the birth and 3 years old, a baby is growing and developing. But at the age of around 3, we expect a child to be toilet trained. Accidents happen, of course, but we expect them to be pretty much toilet trained. They'll have a constant barrage of questions. They always want to be very curious about the world. They think that adults have all the answers. And they have imaginary companions that they talk to sometimes. Are these magical companions? I don't know, but they you often hear children talking to themselves or talking to their stuffed toys. The Jupiter opposition at about 6 years old. Now, if a child goes to the normal kind of school, I'm not talking about the Steiner schools or Montessori schools, I'm talking about bog standard public schools in America or comprehensive schools in the UK. Children are taught how to read and write. And we would expect children to be able to read fairly fluently by the age of 6 and also be able to control the fine motor skills. Now, if they are not able to do this, we usually have to call in some sort of intervention to help that child develop those skills. And they also have their imaginary friends. And I always tell my students, when I was 6 years old, I had the worst handwriting in the class. And I had to have special intervention to help me to learn how to form my letters better. And I used to cry during lunchtime because my teacher used to make me sit there and form these letters over and over again. And I was very resistant to learning how to read as well. But eventually I got it. But one of the things I struggle as a teacher, especially when I'm teaching the younger children, is my handwriting. I always have to practice a bit before lessons start. The waning Jupiter square at the age of 9 years old. At this stage, the children usually, the genders are separate. Girls want to be with the girls and boys want to be with the boys, just as a general sort of thing. But they're able to begin distinguishing between imaginary fears and real fears. So they stop being afraid of the boogeyman under the bed, and they start being more afraid of things like terrorism, the coronavirus. I worked with 9 and 10-year-olds today. They're very concerned about what's going on in the world and about what's happening in Italy and other countries, and what might happen to them. Here in London, of course, we are in a stage where we are looking at a huge jump of confirmed cases. A lot of speculation about what might happen to us in our schools. We are expecting to close down our schools, I think, within the next couple of weeks. We have spring break coming up, but we think we're going to, well, it's speculated that we're going to close a little bit early, but we'll see how it's going to go. And then finally, the Jupiter return, when children go to a bigger school and they begin to experience other children with different belief systems to theirs. And they start to find it very difficult to sit still. Teaching these children at the age of 11 and 12, I always feel like they still want to play. There's still a lot of joy in learning, and teachers should be focusing on giving these children as much of an experience as they can, and parents who are interested in helping their children develop, learning foreign languages. This is the year to take your child abroad to get as many different kinds of experiences as you possibly can. So here's what it looks like just on a in a circular in the chart itself. So if we just pretend, here we go. So Jupiter goes each sign about every year. So Jupiter will transit all of Aries in 1 year, and then at around the age of 3, we have the Jupiter square, the first Jupiter square. And then around the age of 6, if Jupiter is transiting in Libra, it'll be in opposition. And then at 9 years old, it'll be in Capricorn. And then the return will be in Aries. So just to give you an idea of these stages of development on a wheel. So fascinating to me is the brain development of a child. So it used to be thought that only babies experience this rapid growth of brain. But now we know that actually it's adolescents that experience the rapid growth of brain. So just talking you through what's going on. So this red bit here is the inner reptilian part of the brain that's being activated. So this is the part of the brain that reacts to stress, that is on survival mode. So a child who is continuously, say, neglected or having to worry about, am I going to be fed? Am I going to be looked after? It's going to be, that part of the brain is going to be very, very stimulated. And for a young child as well, this is where we see the tantrums and things like that, because the child is almost in a panic mode. But as they get older, they learn how to manage that part of the brain, and the blue part, the logic and reason, starts to take over. So they can control this little bit of the red area a lot more as they become older. It's still there, and particularly in people who have addiction problems, it's interesting to look at when they started their addiction. Is usually something to do with stress during this rapid brain development stage. But anyway, in the early 20s, the brain is fully developed. How do we know it's fully developed? Because we also see an increase in the wrinkling of the cerebral cortex as the brain is forming new neural pathways. So the brain is rewiring itself during adolescence. It's learning how to rethink, and these neural pathways I like to compare to being in a big mansion with new carpeting. And so you can imagine just being in this new mansion and you have muddy shoes. And so as you move from room to room, you leave tracks. And the more you are into one room and passing to another room, the deeper those tracks will be and the harder they are to clean. So eventually they become quite stained. Well, that's like a neural pathway that's being developed. And of course, there'll be other parts of the mansion that are unused, and there won't be those muddy footprints there. And so at the Saturn opposition, roughly, is when the doors to those unused rooms close. And it isn't impossible to open those doors. It's just a lot more difficult later on in life. So this is why I'm always saying to parents at this age of 11 and 12, all the way up to 15, it's really important that we give our children lots of different ways of exploring the world and seeing what's going on. And as you'll see, this is very important for Harry Potter. The other thing that we know about brain development is that girls develop the brain quicker, earlier than the boys do. So this is around the age of 11 for girls that they start to develop. And boys are just about past the age of 12 when they start to develop this rapid increase in brain development. So there's a huge discrepancy between the genders at this very important stage as well. So I never thought I'd hear myself say this, but maybe it's a good idea to educate boys separately from girls at this age, just so girls can develop a sense of confidence. They can get used to the developing bodies without the boys being around. They can find comfort and strength in each other, and then after this stage, bring them back together again. Okay, so we had the Jupiter stages, but now we're going to look at the Saturn stages, quite relevant to Harry Potter as well. So the first Saturn square is about the age of 7. This is when children get their adult teeth. The baby teeth come out and the new adult teeth come in. And of course, we tell them these are your permanent teeth. You must take good care of them because these have to last you all your life. They're permanent. Children are usually capable of telling time. We don't have to say lunchtime. We could say 1 o'clock and they will know what time it is. And they begin to understand right from wrong. They're accountable for their actions. At the first Saturn opposition between the ages of 13 and 14, a lot of those children who've had problems with their baby teeth have to have orthodontics. They begin exam work. Here in England, we begin in earnest. We make children choose the subjects they want to study, and they have to do it in depth, and then they take exams that will determine which school they'll go to, which has a knock-on effect for their future. They go from being quite boisterous and noisy to being quite moody and uncomfortable, a huge change in moods that happen at this stage. And also they begin to crave independence. The waning Saturn square is about the age of 21. Children are settled into work or they're about to ready to leave university. Their wisdom teeth come in. Why am I talking about teeth? Because Saturn rules the hard parts of the body, the boundaries, the skin, the hair, and teeth. So, but the children are usually settled into work, or at least they have a good idea of how they want to earn their money. And then the very famous Saturn return we hear people talk about. I hear a lot of people saying negative things about the Saturn return, but it doesn't have to be negative if you've been working with your Saturn all along. And this goes for the second Saturn return at around the age of 58 as well. It doesn't have to be a difficult experience if you've been working your Saturn. So the stages of Saturn, now in Jupiter stages in years, it was 3 years. In Saturn key stages, it's 7 years. So here again, I'm just using Saturn in Aries as an example. So Saturn in Aries, and then 7 years all the way through Saturn in Cancer, and then Saturn in Libra at the age of 14 to 15 years old, and then up here the 21, Saturn in Capricorn. So what you can see here is the mode it becomes quite important. So here we have the cardinal mode. If Saturn were in Taurus, these stages would be hot. You can see that every year group academically has a different modality. And if you could bear that in mind, it'll help you, if you're a teacher, it'll help you plan lessons, so you don't have to start from scratch every September, and you have sort of have a head start with your classes. So let's get on to Harry Potter then. So the book was first published on the 26th of June, 1997. So it's a really exciting book because it starts off with Harry being quite a miserable little boy. He isn't happy. He has a lot of problems. He doesn't have any friends. He lives under the stairs. He lives with this really mean muggle auntie. He's told that his parents have died in a car accident. They're not really told about what happened to him. So he is rescued by Hagrid on his birthday, and he is taken to Hogwarts, and he meets his best friends, Harry and Ron and Hermione all become this of friends, and they stay friends all the way throughout the series with a few notable fallings out. So as he approaches his first Jupiter returns, he discovers Quidditch. Jupiter is in Virgo. He has that natally, and he begins to choose the very best equipment, the most perfect equipment that he possibly can, and he's crowned a new Seeker. You see, this is Jupiter, Seeker. At the end of October 1991, within days of Jupiter reaching his MC, Harry and Ron fight a mountain troll and rescue Hermione, and they cement their friendship. And then Christmas is his best Christmas ever because he receives his father's invisibility cloak. And it's the sheer joy of the Jupiter return, which also extends to meeting new and interesting people. And so during this year, Harry also meets Severus Snape, and he meets Cornus Quirrell, and he who cannot be named is introduced. So this is when Harry Potter was released. I'm quite fascinated by this because we have Sun and Mercury conjunct in Cancer. So this is a children's book. Now some of the themes as the series goes on become a little bit dark and uncomfortable as Harry gets a little bit older, but it originally started off as a children's book. And a lot of parents, of course, teachers read these books to their children because they wanted to know what was going on too. So the books also had appeals to adults. So this is a chart of Harry Potter. I think this was rectified by Karen Hoffman, who is one of the editors for Astro.com, for all the really interesting articles you read on that. So she proposed this time, and I've worked with this chart quite a bit, and I have to say that I'm a little bit skeptical of rectified charts. It's because you can't prove anything by them, and I'm sure that people have their techniques, and I'm not doubting that. I'm just saying that for me, I until I saw this chart, I never really quite trusted rectified charts. But I think that Karen is onto something, and we'll see more as we go along. So some of the things I'm looking at, I mean, this Jupiter in Virgo, I thought was very, very apt, and the timing as well that comes in here. So Jupiter, by progression, is exactly conjunct the MC when Lord Voldemort kills Harry's parents, and the curse bounces off of Harry and hits Voldemort, and splinters Voldemort's soul, and a little bit of it scars Harry on his forehead, and which I think this unusualness, this intense power, shows with Uranus conjunct the ascendant. So I'm just going to show a really quick clip of this. I can't show too much, but just to give you an idea of what goes on in the film. Okay, so the death of Harry's parents. The father died first. He died outright. The mother you saw was holding Harry. So here we have, the event is October 31st, which we will recognize as Halloween, 1981. That is the time from the books. So what is going on here is we have, go on to the next slide, the mother's sacrifice. In Harry's chart, in this chart, sorry, the moon is conjunct Neptune, the mother's sacrifice. And then Harry Potter's sun is at 8 degrees Leo, which is exactly square to where the sun was in the day that Harry's parents were killed. Now, the 31st of October in every single book is significant. Something important happens on the 31st of October in every single book. So it's a repeat of the cycle. And transiting Mercury was conjunct Jupiter. What Professor McGonagall said was that Harry Potter would become famous like no other boy would become famous. Everybody would know his name. And this is exactly what happened. Upon the death of Harry's parents, Harry became known as the boy who survived. So we have this Jupiter-Pluto thing going on. Now, interestingly, we are also in a Jupiter-Pluto conjunction period as well. This is in Libra. We have this Jupiter-Pluto conjunction happening in Capricorn. So it's actually square to this event. So what happened up here is Jupiter is conjunct the MC. We have this little bit of fortune and luck. Harry didn't die. The curse bounced off him and hit Voldemort. So it's this sort of this miracle that Harry survived and became known as the boy who lived. And his life completely transformed, maybe in a negative way, because once Harry's family died, he went to live with his aunt and uncle who weren't so very nice to him. So life before Hogwarts. So at the age of 5 is when Harry, what the books say, just looking it up in my notes, his aunt, Saturn is transiting Uranus, at the age of 5, his aunt whacks him in on his thighs to prevent him from beating his cousin at musical statues at his cousin's birthday party. So the aunt wanted her son to win. So to distract Harry or to punish him, she hit him. Then the next thing that happens is Jupiter at the age of 8. His cousin receives a computerized robot, Jupiter opposite Uranus, and Harry Potter gets dog biscuits for his birthday. At the age of 10, his aunt's dog chases him up a tree, and Harry has to stay up in this tree until midnight, until the dog gets called back into the house, and Harry can climb back down and go back in the cupboard under the stairs. For his 10th birthday, he received a coat hanger and a pair of his uncle's old. At the age of 11, when Jupiter, transiting Jupiter I'm talking about, was conjunct the sun, is when Harry first communicated with a snake. He spoke parcel tongue and set the snake free from its cage at the zoo. Now, as Jupiter was conjunct to the North Node, was when Harry started to receive owl posts. And so just another super short clip of what happens. Oops. Excuse me, sorry about that. So this moment changed Harry's life, because before then he was just this poor abused child. Remember, I was showing all those stages of brain development. So what would happen with Harry is that red bit I was talking about, the inner reptilian part of the brain, was overstimulated, and Harry was kind of on survival mode, and he had to be set free in some way. Now, a lot of children, very, very sadly, are not rescued, and they have to continue living this miserable existence. But Harry was rescued, and he was rescued by Hagrid, who burst in. Just another short clip. The family went away to this deserted island to get away from all the posts that kept coming. Hagrid eventually came to that to hand deliver, because the post had to be opened up by Harry because it charmed. And if it wasn't opened, they would just keep coming. So here he is on his 11th birthday. It's just after midnight on his birthday. And Harry is again celebrating, and he's very sad. And then something happens. Okay, so just after midnight is when Hagrid arrives, and Hagrid rescues Harry. He stands up because who's gonna back chat to Hagrid because he's so big. Hagrid, this terrible situation he's in, whisks him off to Hogwarts. Takes him shopping first, and then gets him into Hogwarts. So, but at this moment, when Harry's life completely transforms, is Jupiter, getting overexcited. Pluto, transiting Pluto, is bang on the descendant. So in the movie, we see Hagrid banging on the door, waking up the whole entire family. He is this force to be reckoned with. He breaks down the door and he says, Harry, you're coming with me. So Pluto, transiting Pluto, right on the descendant. And Harry Potter's North Node is on Jupiter and Leo. He becomes the very famous boy who lived. Just another little, whoops, sorry, I keep doing that. Taken away to this fantasy land, this thing he never knew even existed. And they kind of live in this parallel universe. And this is my favorite part of the movie, coming in late. Okay, so Professor McGonagall turning into a cat. Harry finds that he is very good at Quidditch. He becomes a seeker, and as I pointed out, he has Jupiter in Virgo. So this is the first event that happens. So Jupiter and Mercury conjunct on the first day that Harry discovers that he is the new seeker, and he is very talented in his new position. So I mentioned that Harry was fortunate in that he was rescued. So interestingly, what can happen with children who are not rescued is that their brain development doesn't happen. So this is the cross sections of brains of 3-year-olds. So this is a normal 3-year-old, and this is the brain of a 3-year-old who's been neglected, who's in that kind of survival mode. And you can see that the inner reptilian part of the brain is overstimulated and overworking. Whereas in the normal, so-called normal 3-year-old, it's not quite so pronounced. So the thing is, teachers are aware that a child has been neglected or in other ways abused. There is a way that this brain development can accelerate and catch up to the rest of its peers if it's known. So what I'm saying is, if Harry hadn't been rescued from the situation, the brain development that should be promised to every child would not have happened for Harry. He would have been the boy who lived on the stairs forever, and he never would have had this wonderful opportunity to meet new friends and to actually develop his talents as a magician, to stand up to Voldemort, to do all the things that he did. He was, he became he was a part of this great adventure. But if he hadn't been rescued, he would not have caught up. This never would have happened. Okay, so Harry's out of this from under the stairs, and he's making friends and making enemies as well, it has to be said. So what happens when children are developing socially is, as I pointed out before, peers become far more important than former significant adults. They're growing away from their parents and their teachers, and they're starting to listen to each other for advice and for what to do. And so Harry certainly does fit this, because he's away from his parents are dead, and he's away from his aunt and uncle who treated him so badly. So self-esteem is very important. There's no empirical evidence that suggests that self-esteem plummets during adolescence. And very generally speaking, girls tend to stay with other girls, and boys want to be independent and to be influential to their peers. But interestingly, Hermione was very much a loner. She had the boys as her friends, but she was too smart for the other girls. You don't really see her with female friends. And of course, Harry and Ron were like brothers. The Weasleys accepted Harry as one of their own. And adults tend to remember their adolescence as being extremely difficult. And I found this out through doing some interviews with adults and asking them to remember their teenage years. And they always get really squirmy and embarrassed when they have to recall what happened when they were young adolescents. So in an academic year, the children more or less have the same Jupiter and Saturn. So when I'm teaching, what I do is I use a graphic ephemeris, and I plot children on this graphic ephemeris to see where they fit. So so here they are as young children. So Hermione is actually the oldest, and quite by far. Like, she was almost like she was a year older than expected. So she was born in late 1979. Ron was the next oldest, and then Harry would be the youngest. He was born on the 31st of August, just to remind you. So in the academic year, where you have to be a certain age by the 1st of September, Harry would have been the youngest in his academic year. Looking at behavioral data, those boys born during the summer weeks are actually the boys that have the most difficulties for getting into trouble, the more records of poor behavior. Harry, by star sign, is a Virgo. But I know from looking at years of behavior data that it's actually Leo boys that are often in more trouble. And I'm not saying it's because they're Leos. I think it's more complicated than that. I think it's because they're the youngest of their academic year. So the first day of school, looking at the graphic ephemeris, it would be on the 1st of September, which should be around here. So I put that out just to see, whereabouts that Jupiter and Saturn cycle is for the whole entire year group. And then Harry has his first attention towards the end of the year. So he's had 3 Jupiter returns, because Jupiter goes retrograde. So here's the first Jupiter return almost on his first day of school. This is when the boys are fighting the mountain troll, by the way, the first Jupiter return. And then it goes retrograde. So here's Christmas, when Harry receives his invisibility cloak from his father's invisibility cloak. And then here's the second Jupiter return. And then he gets his first attention in the spring, and then he gets his final Jupiter return just after that. So, he's experiencing this Saturn of discipline during this time. So we see Saturn up here as making squares as well. So looking at my behavior data, this is from 2011. So I wanted to know which age group receives the most incident sheets. So incident sheets are recorded by teachers when a child has done something wrong. They get a little formal warning, but whatever they're doing wrong in class, it has to be recorded, and then it's usually done in quadruplicate. So a copy goes home, a copy goes to the child's file, a copy goes to the head of year, and the teacher who wrote it retains a copy as well. So which age groups are the worst behaved? So we have Jupiter return children get the most incident sheets by percentage in the school. Oh, by the way, it wasn't me that counted up these incident sheets. We had an IT manager that did this. And the age of 14, remember I said it was the Jupiter sextile its natal position by transit, and then the first Ptolemaic aspect from an outer planet, Uranus sextile Uranus at the age of 14. So these two age points have the most. But look what's happening here when a child has his has a Saturn opposition. the poor behavior drops right down. And scientists like to replicate things. So here we go again. So Jupiter return children have the most. In this year group, it's not quite so pronounced with the Jupiter sextile Jupiter, but it might be that they had their Jupiter sextile Jupiter a little bit earlier. I'm not too sure. I didn't look into it that much. I just wanted to look at the Jupiter return, and then the Saturn opposition children, the behavior dropped right down for this year too. Then I wanted to look at what kind of behavior are children in trouble for. So the 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds are most in trouble for disruptive behavior or disrupting the classroom. So you can see that they get far more incident sheets for this type of behavior than the 14 and 15-year-olds who are having their Saturn opposition. And here this is replicated 4 times. So key stage 3 are the younger children, the 11 and 12-year-olds, and key stage 4, KS4, are the older children, the 14-year-olds. So you can see that here, they're more in trouble for disruption, whereas the older children, for the same thing, are not so much in trouble. And then for the next year group, for the next half term, you see the same thing. The younger children here, this red line, are more in trouble than the older children here on this side. And then you can see with the green and the purple lines as well. So replicated 4 times. Okay, so that's just showing you what we expect from behavior from that particular age group. So in the second year, when Harry is age of 12, he meets Dobby the house elf. And also he reveals that he can speak Parseltongue, which causes all sorts of controversy because people think that he's in the wrong house. He shouldn't be in Gryffindor. He should be in Slytherin with Draco Malfoy and the others. Now Hermione is doubling up her classes, and they're taking Polyjuice so that she can be in 2 places at one time. So transiting Jupiter during this year is crossing over Harry's Mars and Pluto. So he is learning how to speak Parseltongue, and he is, the name of this book, of course, The Chamber of Secrets, which I thought was quite Plutonian. Just another quick clip. This is Dobby. Okay, so just an introduction of Dobby. I mentioned Dobby for a reason, because when Dobby dies at the end of the series, it's one of the saddest scenes of the whole entire of all the books. By the 3rd year, this is published in 1999, things become a little bit darker. Harry is pursued by Sirius Black, who is allegedly a criminal. And he's also pursued by Voldemort and the Dementors. The Dementors are just about as dark and creepy as you can get. A really good association for those Saturn transits that Harry's going to be under. And Buckbeak is the Gryffindor, Hippogriff, who is kind of a bird-like creature, really big, kind of like a giraffe kind of thing. And they're going to chop this poor creature's head off. And so they have to use a Polyjuice lotion to turn back, or they have a turn back time to find a way to release the Hippogriff. So here's the mentor. They're pretty scary. As I said, a really good representation of Saturn transits. Harry describes him as like feeling you're never going to be happy again, which sounds about right. Okay, I'm just going to move on a little bit because I don't want to show too much of the film and get in trouble for copyright. Okay, so transiting Jupiter moves retrograde during all this. So we have it going on during the over Pluto and over Mars. So it's passed over the 1 year and then it's going back over again the other next year. So interestingly, what can happen when Jupiter and Jupiter transiting Jupiter is sextile to its natal position at 13, and transiting Uranus is also sextile its natal position, is that by forward or retrograde motion, it can happen up to 3 times. Well, for Harry, both of these transits happened 3 times. So what retrogrades do, of course, is they extend the length of the transit. So actually, through all this whole entire year, academic year, he's either undergoing a Jupiter sextile transit or the Uranus sextile Uranus transit for the whole entire academic year. So it's a lot of energy for a young person to handle for the first time, and it's certainly is quite an adventure that they're on. In my opinion, it's one of the best books because there's so much action that goes on. The characters are revealed. We meet the Dementors for the first time. There's shape shifting going on. As I said, evil characters are revealed only to come back later on in other books. So in the 4th year is the Goblet of Fire. This is when Harry, on the 31st of October, he's chosen to participate in this Tri-Wizard tournament. Now everyone knows the Tri-Wizard tournament is this really horrific kind of competition. None of the children really want to be a part of it, but Harry is kind of forced into doing it. So what's happening is Saturn is passing over by transit over Harry's moon in Pisces. And what I found behavior-wise for children of this age group is that there's a marked change in their mood and what they're in trouble for. So what they're more often in trouble for is not disruptive behavior, but for not doing enough work. And that certainly seemed to be something that Harry was often in trouble for. He wasn't following rules. He was doing his own thing. He wasn't turning up to classes, and he was finding himself in trouble. And here it is again replicated in my own data 4 times. For each term, we can see that the older children are more often in trouble for not doing enough work than the younger children over on the left-hand side of this chart. So the final Tri-Wizard, Harry's natal set at 24 degrees Virgo. So it's just over here, just past Chiron. So this is quite an exciting tournament, but it ends with the death of an important character, Cedric Diggory. And also we get to meet this character here. This is when I thought to myself, well, maybe J.K. Rowling isn't such a fan of astrology after all, because we all thought that, wow, isn't it great that we have all these characters named after constellations and we get to hear centaurs talking about astrology. But then we meet this character and we kind of think, oh gosh, is that how she sees us, as being these crazy people that make bad predictions? Okay, so Professor Trelawney is kind of a comedy figure. Certainly seemed to be a bit of a spoof of fortune tellers or even astrologers, because she talks a little bit of astrology. And Hermione, one of the heroines of the books, isn't a big fan of the divinity arts classes at all. And so I began to think, well, gosh, maybe we were all wrong. We shouldn't be so happy that J.K. Rowling is she seems to hate astrologers. But however, in 1994, we found evidence that J.K. Rowling had indeed been interested in astrology, enough so that she was able to draw up a chart. So she had written a personal horoscope for the baby of a friend of hers, this turned up in the Antiques Roadshow. Again, thank you very much to Robert Curry for bringing this to my attention. So it had a hand-drawn horoscope and a little bit of detail about the horoscope and what it meant. And you can see the drawing here for a child, sun in Pisces, and I think moon in Leo or Leo rising with the lion here. In auction, a good few years later, after the Harry Potter franchise became famous, it sold for £25,000. Okay, so the 5th year is when we meet probably the most irritating character I've ever come across, Professor Umbridge is her name. Now Harry is expelled. He during this year he's in serious trouble. He had use a charm, a special sort of spell to get rid of the Dementors who were tormenting his cousin, the one he doesn't like, and he was expelled from school. And when you're expelled from Hogwarts, you're not expected to come back. So this is the woman who expelled him, Dolores Umbridge. She's evil, sadistic, condescending, and cruel. Stephen King once described her as the greatest make-believe villain since Hannibal Lecter, and she hates centaurs as well. So Dolores Umbridge, very irritating character. This is the one who's responsible for nearly ending Harry's education. I'm just going to skip the film because I'm sure you can get an idea of her character just by looking at her picture. So transiting Jupiter is conjunct Neptune during this book. And so this is when Harry kisses a character, Cho Chang, under the mistletoe at Christmas. And the disastrous Valentine's date was reported in their newspaper called The Quibbler. So it's just a bit of scandal going on here with Harry, with transiting Jupiter conjunct Neptune. Now the 6th year, this is released in 2005. This is the one when Dumbledore dies. So what happened here is that the death of Dumbledore, we have the North Node, transiting North Node, conjunct Saturn in Harry Potter's chart. And this was, of course, a great deal of trouble. This is Harry's hero. This is somebody who really looked after him throughout all his time at Hogwarts, and who protected him and made sure that he was on the right path. He really was Harry's protector and someone that Harry looked up to. So the North Node transiting on Saturn when he died. And also pointing out Saturn over here opposing Pluto for the change of life that Harry had to experience, because he was no longer protected. He had to stand up to Voldemort on his own. And here, just looking at it, is piled up to a couple planets in square to Mercury and Pluto. Now the final year, the 7th year, this is when Dobby dies, and I said this is the most tear-jerking scene of all, and also Voldemort dies finally. Okay, so then once she throws that dagger, they go onto the beach and they are transported to a different place. And what is revealed is that Dobby has been hit by that knife and he's dying. And he manages to say goodbye and that's the end. So transiting Jupiter is here. Just moving through Pisces, which is opposing to Harry's natal Jupiter. And Jupiter in Pisces. So it's the most tear-jerking scene of the whole entire film. I hope you can understand the connection between Jupiter and Pisces opposing Jupiter in Virgo. Oops, sorry. So the death of Voldemort, of course, is going to be something that's going to have a huge effect on Harry and the rest of them. So we have here transiting Chiron on Harry's Venus in Gemini. So Harry is finally free of this huge curse, or whatever you want to call it, of Voldemort, and he's free to live his life, and he kind of is able to move away from maybe not move away from the grief, but he's able to understand his life purpose a bit more, and his role as the healer of the others, because he's the one that also set them free. Now, Daniel Radcliffe, I don't have his time of birth, I'm afraid, but I just want to show some synastry between the characters and the actual actors who played them. So the release date for all show them at their own Jupiter return. So all of them had their Jupiter return when the movies were released. Of course, this changed Daniel Radcliffe's life. So it will change all their lives as well. Remember what I was saying about all that brain development going on, and this idea of providing new opportunities for all of them. And so they were able to became overnight successes, and they became household names with this film. And what is fascinating is that we got to see them grow up in front of the camera as well. We saw them getting older and maturing before our very eyes as the franchise went on. So here we go. Here's a bit of synastry between Daniel Radcliffe and Harry Potter. So I know Harry Potter's time of birth, so I can put him in the middle. So they have a Mars to the North Node conjunction, and we also have Mercury to the Sun conjunction. So Daniel is able to tap into Harry's personality and speak the way that Harry Potter would like to communicate, and we have a bit of his energy that comes out as well with the Mars connections. Emma Watson, who played Hermione, and this is Hermione Granger's chart. If we put them into a Bible, what we're going to see is we also have Chiron to Mercury. J.K. Rowling said that she identified most with Hermione as a character, but we know that Hermione was, as a teenager, quite uncomfortable in herself. She was too smart for her own good. She was a bit of a loner. She worked extremely hard to be successful. Of course, eventually she fell in love with Ron. But we have some really solid connections here with this Chiron conjunct Mercury. And also we have the Pluto and the Uranus connection as well. Emma Watson took this character and basically showed her power, and she did it in her own unique way. Rupert Grint, who played Ron, just going to put them into a bi-will. Maybe not quite so profound as the others by just looking at conjunctions, but we have Saturn, Ron Weasley, Rupert played this character as kind of being like the scaredy cat. He always pulled that little face that showed that he was frightened of things. We also have Sun on the North Node here, so there's a sense of direction or maybe a sense of destiny here. Ron is certainly a sensitive character with this happening in Pisces. And we put Hermione and Ron Weasley together. they fell in love. So remember, these are birth dates that J.K. Rowling chose. You know, and she has birth dates for all the characters as far as I can work out, and you know, it's just, I just think it's fascinating. So we have Ron's Jupiter on Hermione's node, if we're using a noon chart, but it's also very close to the North Node, and also his moon on her Saturn. You know, so she brought him down to earth. You know, she kept him, you know, on the straight and narrow. And so this just shows great, I think this shows great synastry and great understanding between these two characters. J.K. Rowling herself, the story goes that she was just a single mother. She was divorced, and she was coming up from a train from London. She decided about creating this magical world, and she worked at this cafe for a very long time without any money. She had to endure a lot of hardships before she actually achieved success. So she gave Harry Potter her own birthday. But if we look at the date, so here we are, the conjunct suns. But there's lots of other things going on here too. His Jupiter conjunct her Pluto-Uranus. So his Jupiter sign, I think, is very important. I can just imagine her on a train, thinking about how am I going to develop this character, and what's he going to do on his Jupiter return, and how can she portray this out. And you know, I hope that you can follow the logic behind it. I think that she was using these charts to construct her storyline. And I think if I only saw one or two coincidences, you know, I might think, oh well, maybe it is just chance. But I think it's more than that. I think that she really did use astrology to create these wonderful characters, and she had the imagination to work it as well. And here's Hermione. So they have a sun and moon conjunction. And as I said, that she always thought that Hermione was closest to her heart. And so I'm going to end it there. There's a lot of other connections. You know, I think that J.K. Rowling wanted Ron Weasley to have the moon conjunct Saturn, to show the rock solid family that he grew up in, because you know, they were a poor family, and he just needed those connections, and how the arrival of Harry actually brought him the friendship that he needed as well outside of his own family. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that it gives you some thought. Literature is a passion of mine, and I've seen quite a few books that I think have used a lot of astrology. The other book that I've seen use a lot of astrology is Gone with the Wind, which has the characters based on the signs of the zodiac. Not as quite as in-depth as Harry Potter does, but Margaret Mitchell, for example, created Scarlett O'Hara, the feisty Aries woman, a little bit over-sexualized, 3 children with 3 different men in the book, and Rhett Butler, the Leo, you know, who got attention wherever he went, and onto Bonnie Blue Butler, the Sagittarian who died in a horseback accident. So I think there's a lot of interesting things to do in literature. And as I say, literature is a passion of mine. I'm an English teacher. There's another article you might be interested in if you're interested in astrology and literature. It's currently on astro.com, Herschel, Uranus, and Mary Shelley's Vision of Horror, which traces medical advances throughout history. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. I'm next on in June, again, talking about mystic moments when a flower speaks. And thank you very much for joining us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alex. And we're looking forward to seeing you on June 18th for your next meeting. So thank you from all of us.
Thank you.
Goodbye for now.